It's been quite a journey to get here. At the end of last year, with the declining COVID numbers, we were hoping that it would be an in-person meeting, and a lot of people had requested that, and we were getting very excited about it. But unfortunately, it was just the calm between the storm, and it's important that we do remember this is a serious virus, and the health of our members, that is you guys, it comes first. But we promise that as soon as it's safe, as soon as it becomes safe, and as soon as the government allows it again, we will have our regular meetings back at Kelvin Grove. Perhaps with vaccine coming, and we miss you guys, and I know you miss us too. However, luckily, we have this benefit of this new technology, and we can have our meetings in a Zoom format, which is really fantastic, so that you guys still can have access to interesting talks, to lectures, and all the benefits that being in this club entails. So we really, really appreciate you embracing this new technology and staying with us during these confusing and difficult times. Which brings us to the motto for our 2021 year, strength in community. As we know, science tells us that having a community keeps us healthier. Our lives, they're enriched with friendship. We make memories that we treasure throughout our lives, and we contribute in the community to make our world a better place. But seeing as this is Valentine's month, it's not just about science. It's about our hearts being open. And when we are part of a very special and valuable community like the IWC, we know it's good for us because our hearts and our souls feel an intuitive happiness and a sense of being home. For this, personally, I know I've said this over and over again, but I'm really grateful. Speaking of gratitude, I just wanted to thank the board of 2020 for all of their hard work during the pandemic last year. Sue, it was a difficult year to be president and leader, and thank you for helping keep the club together. The board's decision to have smaller in-person year-end events hosted by area reps was a resounding success. Thank you to all the area representatives who helped with selecting venues and menus and really beautiful spaces. You guys are very much the backbone of our club, and your hard work is deeply appreciated by the board and by all the members of the club as well. And yeah, thank you for the people that all contributed. They made flower arrangements. There was a lot of people behind the scenes to make these brunches, lunches, champagne breakfasts, and high teas, something really, really special. So thank you for all of those who gave their time and their talent, especially group leaders who contributed towards the Zoom lectures last year, and those who found ways to create outings that were socially distant, COVID compliant, and outside. And for those who kept their groups and clubs together, even when we couldn't meet in person. It's a big deal, and it's really important. So we thank you for that. Yeah. As with last year, the unknown factor of COVID means we can't really plan for this year with as much precise accuracy as we would like as a board. However, we're a fluid board, and I'm really proud of our board we have this year. We've got many creative ideas, we've got a lot of professional experience, and we have people that are really generous with their time to help make this club keep on going forth, and that are happy to serve all of you as members. So thank you. I would just like to remind everyone quickly to please keep your eyes on our newsletter, because there's a lot of information that comes through it about club activities that are happening, even during the time of a pandemic. And even though we don't know exactly what our year ahead holds, we are going to be going forth and trying lots of new things and interesting things. We would like to reach out to more IWC clubs around the world. We'd like to see how they're dealing with this pandemic. And we'd also like to see what kind of ideas they are using to help keep their members connected as a club as well. The exciting thing about having Zoom is that we can have speakers that can be based anywhere in the world. Even if we have an in-person meeting at Kelvin, if we make it a hybrid meeting, if there's someone really spectacular that we really want to hear from, we can put them up on a screen and we can still gather as a club, but we can hear someone talking to us as our club in Cape Town, even if they're in London, or even if they're in Japan, or even if they're in New York. So there is, even through the difficulties of this time, some really exciting choices up ahead. So anyways, what else are we thinking of doing? If health and regulations permit, we would like to have some kind of club fundraiser this year to benefit philanthropy, as always, and also to build up our IWC general fund. As many of you know, we have reduced fees this year, but if we have a successful fundraiser, if it's allowed, it means more opportunities for you as a club and more benefits for you as a club. And if you guys like the masks this year that we've had, IWC branded masks, we're also keeping an eye out for maybe more IWC branded merchandise as well, because we're proud of our club. Anyways, that's a lot from me and more than I intended to say, but I would now like to introduce everyone to the rest of our board, because everyone has a bit to say. And so without further ado, I'm going to mute myself.
Thank you, Amanda. And I just want to say a big thank you actually to Amanda, who I think is going to be a great and dynamic president. But thank you to Amanda and Victoria for organizing this and getting us into the 21st century with our technology. I think we've done a fantastic job. We've all in this last year had to learn how to use some new technology. We've certainly got to know the word Zoom, and I think it's been an amazing benefit to us all. And I think it's fantastic that we're all here looking at each other, hearing each other. So thank you for setting that up and dragging us into the 21st century. And the big question on everybody's lips is that Amanda looks absolutely fabulous, but is she sitting there in her pajama bottoms? That's what I want to know. But anyway, as you probably, no, she's got the dress up, wonderful. As you know, I am honoured to be the Vice President this year, and I just want to say another quick thank you to Karen, who was an excellent Vice President last year in difficult circumstances, but she did some amazing work developing the roles of the area reps and our group leaders. And in that last year and at the present, those people who I'd also like to especially thank are going to be very much the backbone of the club. The club is a friendship club, and in these difficult times, for many of us, those ties of friendship have been a strong thread that have kept us going. And the area reps and group leaders have done an amazing job. And I look forward to meeting you guys, hopefully in person, and that we can eventually get those activities going again and get to meet up in person. So I look forward to doing that. I just want to also mention, if you haven't done, please look at our newsletter online, because again, Amanda and the team have done a fantastic job at producing something really entertaining, something really fun to read at the moment, and we all need that. And I love this Love at the Time of Lockdown, which I could tell you more about that, but I'll save that for another day. But it's a great edition. So I do want to keep reminding everybody, please read it, because there's a lot of work gone into it, and it's worthy of note. So I look forward to seeing you one day at Kelvin, certainly meeting you at some of those smaller functions, the group events, and maybe some of the area rep events. And I hope that won't be too far down the line. I certainly will be getting in contact with the area reps and so on, and look forward to seeing you again soon. So without too much further ado, I will let Amanda pass you over to Marianne, our secretary.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Marianne Lovell, and I'm greeting you this morning from the wilderness, the village of Wilderness along the garden route. We decided to duck away for a week's holiday, and of course my husband and I are delighted that the beaches are open, because what is a beach holiday without the beach? So the timing was really great. I'm honored to be your secretary this year. My function really takes place behind the scenes, so I don't really have a portfolio as such that I can share with you today, but I would like to say that the 2021 board is working hard to make things happen as efficiently as possible, and also to have safe and frequent meetings and activities, events. I'm sure everybody is champing at the bit to get going again, so I certainly am. And I look forward to seeing you all again in person at Calvin Grove as soon as we are allowed to meet, and hopefully that will be sooner rather than later. And in the meantime, just ask you to stay safe and well, and to enjoy our first IWC gathering for the year. It's really exciting. I see there are 80 participants, so that's really wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join up with us. It's not as good as in person, but it's a really damn good second. So have a lovely morning and enjoy it. And it's really, really great to see all your faces on the screen. Have a good time. Bye.
Hopefully you can hear me. Yes, Vanessa Hoffner, your treasurer, and like Marianne said, I'm also like her a little bit more behind the scenes. counting the money every few days. Just to give you an update, as I also said at the AGM, the finances of the club in general are in very good health, is the best way to describe it. Obviously, last year our expenses were materially less than we had originally anticipated, as all the events at Kelvin Grove had to be cancelled. And then, as Amanda's also said, we've reduced our fees for this year. And nevertheless, it's just been wonderful to see all the payments coming through. So again, thank you very much to all the members. We've already received payments for the subscriptions for this year of about 280 people have paid. And we've only got about another 60 who are still outstanding, which is excellent. And I know quite a few of those payments are usually made when we meet in person at Kelvin. So obviously we can't do that at the moment. And I mean, by no means, I know we're behind in terms of timing, but you can't do them in person at the moment. So we're going to be as lenient as we can for those kinds of payments. And hopefully we'll be able to see you in, I don't know, March, April, May, sometime. And then we'll be able to take the cash payments for members who don't want to do the electronic option. Obviously, electronic is still first choice. So if any of you still need to pay, please, we would be appreciative if you can pay for us, or if you can ask a friend and come up with some idea of how you can get the payments made. For this year, just going forward, as I said, the finances are very secure. We're very happy with the financial situation of the club. When we get back to normal, it does mean next year we'll probably revert back to the normal fee. And also just in terms of expenses this year, what will probably be different going forward to what we've had in the past is, as Amanda said earlier on, having hybrid meetings. So I think even when we do eventually go back to Kelvin, we will always have the option to also meet electronically. So that'll add a little bit to the costs of our meetings, but I think it'll just also add an opportunity just to have so many more of our members taking part. So I do think it's an excellent change. And lockdown has taught us a lot of things, like, as Christine said, what's a Zoom? We know what a Zoom is. And it really has improved our communication with our members in so many different other facets. So we will do that, and it will obviously impact on how we spend the club finances. But for now, we're all okay. Finances are good. Few members still need to be paid, but from the treasurer's point of view, everything is wonderful. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Anna Maria Deledonne, and I think most of you know me. And for the new members, I have been on the board previously, and I was president. And I just want to tell you, it's only once you're on the board do you really know how hard the board members work. So thank you to 2020, and good luck to 2021. I just want to wish everybody a warm welcome, and we do have a little bit of a ray of hope with the vaccines coming on. But as we're a friendship club, I read this and I thought it's just for us. Friends are therapists you can drink with. I apologize for not putting the bank details in the newsletter, but you do find it on the first page of the newsletter as well. Just a little bit of reminders, your bottle tops and tags to collect for Geraldine Berry in the southern suburbs. And you can always phone me and I will collect. If not, check with your libraries. I know Seapoint Libraries will collect the bottle tops as well. And I know it's very hard to give donations and things. So I've combined 2 months, February and March. Anything you've got, please clear out your houses. Books, magazines, everything, because some will go to the Chester Williams squatter camp, which we have already collected, and the others will go to, in Table View, there's a shop called Fallen Angels, and all the money collected goes for the dogs that they find abandoned, and 6 dogs. So it goes to a really good cause. And the other thing I just want to say is, I've said it many times, and I'm going to say it again many times. I cannot thank you more for the generosity of these ladies. It is just always, every year, it's absolutely overwhelming. And thank you very, very much. And if you wanted anything, just phone me and I will come and collect, really. I will be in Claremont on the 15th. So if anybody wants me to come round, I am collecting. Thank you very much.
Morning, ladies. For those who don't know me, my name is Victoria Dickerson. I'm your Social Media and Communications Chair 2021. And I have enormous shoes to fill after Amanda. But and I have to say, when she asked me to be to take over from her, this was many months ago, I thought, oh, don't worry, all the Zoom meetings will be over by then. We'll be back to normal. How wrong could I be? Anyway, so we here we are once again. But yeah, so I'm originally from Scotland, and I joined the IWC in 2018. Yeah, so what I really want to talk to you about is the WhatsApp broadcast message. So sorry, just 1 second. I just need to change my view. All right. So then, can everybody just please? I know we always say put your phones down and don't look at your phones during the meeting, but could you just pick up your phone and go into your contacts list and just ensure that you have the broadcast number saved into your phone? Because if you don't, you will not receive the broadcast messages. You may receive messages from from other members of the IWC, but you won't, or even from me directly, but you will not receive the broadcast messages. It's a security issue that that the app has to make sure that people can't just broadcast to people willy-nilly. So the number is 079 044 0821. There was another number at some point, and I think that's possibly where the confusion come in. And I know I'm probably preaching to the converted because you're all here. And if you do have friends who aren't attending, can you just make sure that they've got it in their phone, and because they're missing out. Also, moving on to Facebook, we have a Facebook group which is private, so you have to actually ask to join. And we only allow people in that are registered and fully paid up members. So it's very secure. And there is a bit of confusion because there is an IWC Cape Town gallery page, which is now defunct, but we're going to, we're potentially going to use that as our information group. So it's the I've sent the link via WhatsApp, and if anybody would like, I'll put it up on the chat room shortly, so you can make sure that you're a member of the correct group, because bizarrely we have more members in our gallery group than we do in our actual group. Okay. Yeah. So Christine's already touched on the newsletter, which I think has certainly grown arms and legs through absolute need through 2020, and it's actually, I think now everybody's really looks forward to reading it. There's some great jokes and things in there. So yeah, I think that's everything. But please just get the message out there. If you're on Facebook already, on our Facebook group, and your friends aren't, please ask them to join. It's just another, we're trying to make it a bit more of a communication channel this year. Okay, right. I'll be able to take questions at the end if anybody has any issues with social media. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Victoria.
And it's a great 2021.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, dear ladies. Good morning, John. It's a pleasure to be here with you and present and say welcome to the new members. We have for today 2 new members. We would like to say welcome to Val Petson from UK. She's living in Rondebosch. She has 2 proposers, Sybil Rutherford and Sue Galloway. And welcome to Pam Collins. Pam Collins is from South Africa. She's living in Philippi, and she has 2 proposers, Erika Liu and Renate Flint. Well, this is everything for the moment. I wish you a nice day. And just to remember, tomorrow we are having Zumba again. Please join us. It's a nice group. We have a lot of fun. Of course, we are doing exercise, but it's very nice to chat each other before the class and after the class. Please join us. You are welcome. And okay, see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I
Our speaker for this month is Jonathan Downes, or Jonathan Spencer. He originally comes from London. He's the great-grandson of a clipper ship captain who brought tea from China. He served in the Canadian Army. He studied ancient and modern history, and he's lectured at universities and private associations on the subject of Napoleonic Egypt. He writes historical nonfiction under the name Jonathan Downes. His major work, a revised account of the British acquisition of the Rosetta Stone, Discovery at Rosetta, was published in London 2008 and Cairo 2020. It was reprinted. He speaks several languages. He's trained with a former Russian national fencing coach, and he's lived and worked abroad all of his life. He's currently living here in Cape Town, South Africa, and we are very, very excited to have him as our speaker this month.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, everybody of the IWC. Amanda got this idea after the initial launch of my novel in the end of September. It was put on Amazon Kindle, but it's recently just been gone to print. So there is a minor celebration on launch as well. I'm very pleased about this, because now she can have a copy. So
hard copy. I like hard copies.
That's right. So really, the background of the talk is what is the research behind the novel and what was in my original book, which is about Bonaparte in Egypt. I keep calling him Bonaparte because at that time, he was only General Bonaparte. He was not Napoleon. He was not yet emperor or a king, if you like. So I keep referring to Bonaparte, and people say, is that the same as Napoleon? I says, yes, it is. So the main thing is about the Rosetta Stone, why it's in London, why we even know about it, and how it was actually cracked and used to understand the entire history of Egypt. Because of course, hieroglyphs are inscribed all over Egypt, monuments, tombs, temples, but no one had been able to understand them. For about 2,000 years, they'd been a mystery, and everybody had dozens of theories, many of them led by Herodotus from about 465 BC. So it wasn't exactly the most current opinion. Essentially, in the late 18th century, when everyone became very curious about the old world, Napoleon Bonaparte went to Egypt, and it was, if you like, the 18th century equivalent of a mission to Mars. Nobody had really done this ever before. One or two explorers, but nobody had gone and actually recorded what they'd seen. So if we can go to the PowerPoint, then we'll show you some images and so forth. There
Perfect.
we go. Okay. So I've called this The Sword and the Stone. That was actually the original title of my first book, because there was a discrepancy between the academics and the army, because the army took with them a special corps of what were called the savants. And they were academics, the elite of French academia, essentially. And there was a terrible rift halfway through the very short life of French Egypt. So this is the year 1798. Okay, now I need the arrow keys here.
Is it not working? Let me just see.
There we go.
Yeah.
Go back up there. Now, this is it, the famous Rosetta Stone. Almost everybody has heard of it. Most people have seen a picture of it, not entirely sure what it is or why it's so special. Very simply, this has one inscription on it, but in 3 different scripts. It's not actually 3 languages. A lot of people thought that, but the bottom band of writing is in ancient Greek. The middle band is in Demotic Egyptian, that is handwritten Egyptian. And the very top is hieroglyphs. These are the sacred writings intended for the gods. You didn't write special things down on paper for the gods because, of course, paper could burn. Stone was permanent, so the gods could only generally read stone. And this is why you have so many of these stones that were later discovered after the French evacuated. So the main thing was that in the ancient Greek, which the original scholars could read, the very last line said, "This decree shall be inscribed upon a stone in 3 scripts, Demotic, Greek, and sacred." And the sacred, of course, is the hieroglyphs. As soon as they saw this, they realized all they had to do was translate the Greek, set it and correlate it to the hieroglyphs, and bingo, they would have cracked the code. Unfortunately, it wasn't as simple as that, and it took them about 22 years to do it. Oh, there we go. Okay, this for me is how it all started. It was for me. There we are. I was editing the memoirs of a Royal Marine officer, and amongst his papers was that document right there. And it's titled rather marvelously, Relics Brought Down from Egypt and Taken to London in the Madras, 50 Guns by Me, now in the British Museum. And I went down this list and I realized it was actually like a bill of lading, a cargo manifest of all the treasures from Egypt taken from the French. And item number 8 said, a black stone with 3 inscriptions, black granite from Rosetta. And I thought, that's the Rosetta Stone, surely. I then looked through his diaries. There is no mention of him picking up the stone. He had no idea he had it amongst his possessions that he was in charge of. The other thing that was a problem was that HMS Madras was not part of the British Museum's actual history of the stone. They didn't know about this document. So I contacted them. In fact, I just picked up the phone and I asked to speak to the keeper of ancient Egypt and Sudan. And the fellow asked me, what exactly is it about? Well, I found a new prime source document about the Rosetta Stone. He says, you okay? Can you tell me a little bit? And I said, well, and I gave him the background. He said, oh, good. I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, we get all sorts of phone calls. Most people saying that the stone was probably brought here by aliens. And I said, okay, no, I'm not thinking that. And he said, okay, so I was allowed to have an interview. And they were quite fascinated by this document, came to the conclusion there were quite a few of them about, but this one was personalized and very special. So that led me on to do the research. This is the strategic map to give you an idea of why Napoleon even went there in the first place. Very simply, they couldn't invade England. It was too dangerous. So the best way to hit England was to invade India. And all they had to do was sail through the Mediterranean, capture Egypt, hack a path through the desert, sail their fleet into the Red Sea, and bingo, you're into the Indian Ocean. It was really as simple as that when you're sitting in Paris, especially when you're Napoleon Bonaparte and you're invincible. You have to remember, this young chap was 27 years old. At the age of 26, he'd been given command of the army of Italy. He had completely destroyed the armies of the Empire of Austria, essentially the Holy Roman Empire. Nobody else had been able to do this. He did. He did it in a year. He completely defeated them, pushed them back, and this is what our young fellow looked like. Not the slightly balding, paunchy, sick-looking fellow with a pale face with his hand in his waistcoat that we're most used to. This is the hero of the revolution. He was long-haired, romantic-looking. He was the absolute darling of France. The government was scared stiff of him because at the drop of a hat, he could bring 20,000 troops and basically take over the country. He never did. It never really occurred to him, but he did help them in various coups after the revolution. But the theory was, if we can send him as far away as possible, it would be better for us. Luckily, Bonaparte was not interested in invading England because it was too dangerous and it would ruin his reputation. He thought too many French soldiers would die. So he wanted to remain invincible. Also, he wanted to conquer something great, and to become a conqueror of Egypt was something that Alexander had done. So he set his sights on that instead. We will get this.
It worked before. There we go.
Okay. Now this is an interesting engraving of Rosetta at the time. This is 1798. You can see it even in 1798, it was almost European looking. When the French landed, they arrived at Alexandria. They couldn't get into the port. There were 400 ships. He had come with the largest fleet ever assembled in France. There were 40,000 combat troops, in total 50,000 people. Of this number, they are estimating somewhere between 300 to 500 women, and they're just not catalogued. They were part of the ancillary staff, catering. They did all of the manual labor. And in fact, quite a lot of officers' wives, this was the most amusing thing I found, dressed up as junior officers and kept their costumes on until well after the invasion, and then revealed themselves only once they had captured Cairo. It was quite extraordinary. I'm going to go here.
Maybe try this one.
Okay. This is one of the fellows who was in charge of Egypt at the time. The Mamluk was the government of Egypt. They were a very unruly part of the Ottoman Empire, which was the largest empire on earth at the time. But later 19th century expression, the sick man of Europe, refers to the Ottomans. They had such a large empire, they couldn't actually manage it. And in Egypt, the Mamluks were, they weren't exactly politically correct. They were quite extortionate. They used to tax their peasants to death. And this man was one of the two leaders. This is Murad Bey. A bey in the Ottoman Empire is a bit like a duke. There was another fellow called Ibrahim Bey, but Murad was the most ferocious warrior known in the East. That sword lying next to him is where we call it a scimitar. It's a Damascus sword. With that, he was said he could decapitate an ox with one stroke. When the French arrived, they brought 25,000 men into the field. They formed huge squares of soldiers of infantry. They had no horse with them really to speak of. They put their men facing outwards with their bayonets, and they made 6 ranks. So they looked like an enormous fortress moving across the land. The Mamluk cavalry couldn't really break in. They were slaughtered by the thousand. The Mamluks eventually here are trying to flee back to the Nile. This is the Battle of the Pyramids. It's often portrayed as if it took place in and out of the pyramids, the cavalry riding back and forth, because it's very dramatic. But in fact, the pyramids are 16 kilometers away. This is right outside the gates of Cairo. The Egyptians don't really understand this part of their own history, but they should be very proud, because the whole of Cairo came out to the gates. There were nearly 80,000 people standing on the opposite bank of the Nile, watching the battle, screaming, outraged, terrified. They couldn't do anything to help because the Mamluks had met the French on the wrong side of the river.
Oh.
So within a few hours, basically Cairo fell. This is a scene, this is an example of the type of battle. The Mamluk there, he is barely armed. In fact, the Mamluk cavalrymen often had 2 swords. They used to ride at these French infantry formations with the reins of the horse in their teeth. They would draw the 2 swords and ride straight at them. There are accounts of these fellows leaping the 6 rows of French infantry and chopping the barrels of the muskets in half with their swords. They, of course, never survived these attacks. The triumph of taking Cairo, taking Alexandria, chasing Murad away, lasted for Napoleon Bonaparte about 2.5 weeks. Unfortunately, Admiral Brueys had left his vast battle fleet, that is 13 battleships. We get the expression battleship from ship of the line of battle. At the time, ships, of course, could only fire sideways from their beams. So what you used to do was sail nose to tail into battle and hopefully get the enemy either side of you. So that's where we get the idea of the ship of the line. These battleships were moored in a very large bay outside Alexandria, joining Alexandria and Rosetta at the mouth of the Nile, and it's called Aboukir Bay. They thought they were safe. What they didn't understand was that Horatio Nelson here had been chasing this fleet, this huge fleet, all over the Mediterranean since early June. The British had no idea what the French were up to. They didn't know they'd gone to Egypt. He only heard from various merchantmen outside Syracuse in Sicily, and in fact, when he was heading to Malta, they realized they'd gone to Alexandria. He streaked straight for Alexandria, but arrived 3 days too early, and the French had landed. Now, he heard again. He came back. He came back with his 13 ships and met the French 13. The result was the Battle of the Nile, probably one of the most famous British naval victories and Nelson's greatest victory. The French ships were moored so close to land, they were convinced no attacker could come in between them and brace them in a crossfire, which is exactly what the British did. When the British saw them, they actually raced towards the French. The French were terrified. Half of their crews were on land trying to get food and water and more supplies. They were outmanned. They had nobody to man the guns or the sails. They couldn't sail away. The British had trapped them in their bay. The first British ship sailed around the nose of the first French ship in the line, and from then on went behind them. Every British ship followed suit. The second line of British ships went on the other side. They trapped the French either side and blasted every single one of them. Only 3 ships escaped this. We have all heard the poem, "The Boy Stood on the Burning Deck." This was the burning deck. This is the French ship Orion, Bonaparte's flagship. And the boy in question was the son, the 12-year-old midshipman son of the captain, Captain Casabianca. He looked down from the rail of the Orion, and bystanders say they tried to get him to jump down into the water, into the rescue boats, but he didn't, and turned and ran back into the fire. Hence the very sentimental Victorian poem that we all know. And Orion exploded. The explosion was so great it was heard 25 miles away. It was the end of the battle fleet, and it was the end of Napoleon Bonaparte's belief that he could get back home. They were now stranded. No way of getting back. So to make the most of it, they occupied all the abandoned palaces that the Mamluks who had fled had left behind. The general HQ became a palace like this. This is the palace of Hassim Bey. This became one of the academics' headquarters. The academics then formed the Institute of Egypt. You might remember in 2011 and 2012, during the riots in Cairo and the Arab Spring in North Africa, that the Institute of Egypt still exists, and it suffered a firebomb that went through its window. The Egyptians, I commentated on these riots for History Today magazine at the time, and I was staggered to find that ordinary Egyptians linked arms to protect their museum and to protect the Institute of Egypt, which contained priceless manuscripts. They ran inside to douse out the flames. They tried to protect their own heritage from rioters. So this was what they were trying to protect. Here's a smaller picture giving you an idea of the interior of these palaces. Very dark, cool, very high ceilings, of course, in the heat, which can reach 50 degrees Celsius. They set up their organization under these 2 fellows. On the right, we have Gaspard Monge, and on the left is Claude-Louis Berthollet. These 2 fellows were so inseparable, they became known as Citizen Monge Berthollet. Any questions? Ask Citizen Monge Berthollet. So these 2 chaps were in charge of the entire crew of academics, and there were 167 of them. Their job was to do a doomsday book, if you like, of Egypt. Record, write down everything, measure. Here are an example of 2 of the sermons. The average age of these fellows was 26. The fellow on the right is the youngest. He was 17, but he was so sharp at what he did. He was a draftsman for the School of Bridges and Highways, École des Ponts et Chaussées, and they bent the rules for him, saying you can do your final exams in Egypt under Citizen Monge, which absolutely terrified him, but he did it anyway. Yeah. This fellow, any artists amongst you who are familiar with your pencils, if you know Conte, the brand Conte pencils, this is the fellow who set up the company, if you like. This is Nicolas Jacques Conte, and he is the man who invented the non-graphite colored pencil for all the savants, because of course there was a trade embargo at the time and the British supply of graphite was closed off to France, so they couldn't get them anymore. In the desert, they also ran out of all of their equipment because of course it sank in the bay after Nelson sunk it. So he had to make everything again from fresh. And he used clay, pigment, and sand, and made colored pencils for all the savants. And it is his family that still continue the colored pencils of Conte. On the right is an indication of what this fellow was capable of. He was like Merlin. That balloon there is evidence of the very first aerial combat in history. This is 1797, the Battle of Fleurus, and it was designed by Monsieur Nicolas Jacques Conte. Here they are gathering in their garden. I like to think of them just having coffee like this, and I'm sure they did because they actually wrote down that the average Egyptian drank 20 cups of coffee a day. So I dare say they were well fueled. One of the things that Bonaparte had learned from Italy was that he had to keep his own troops informed. So he brought with him a giant printing press. And the first thing they did was print a newspaper, the Courier of Egypt. And there you have it. It's a propaganda paper to make sure that the troops were happy, that they understood what was going on, and that their glorious leaders knew exactly what to do next. That was, of course, all tongue-in-cheek because, of course, no one knew anything. But the other one on the right is the Egyptian Decade, La Décade Égyptienne. Now, this is the official organ of the Institute of Egypt. To explain, the French Revolution changed everything in France. They changed their calendar, they changed the days of the week, the names of the months, everything. The new year shifted from January to September. So the problem was a week didn't have 7 days anymore. It had 10. So the word décade in French meant a week, a 10-day week. So this is the Egyptian week. Now here we are onto the Rosetta Stone. They'd been there a year basically. They'd been exploring all round and about, but they hadn't found anything of particular note. In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte got back with his army from a terrible campaign in Syria. Dreadful, dreadful story. And at that moment, more or less within that week, I believe, they stumbled here and they were building Fort Julien. Fort Julien here, as you can see, is at the mouth of the Nile. This is Rosetta. Standing in its place had been a 15th century tower. Now, there are all sorts of stories about how the Rosetta Stone was actually discovered. My favorite one is from about 1850, where a little girl had written that her grandpapa had brought it back from Egypt in his rucksack. In my research, I discovered that the Rosetta Stone is nearly 1 meter high. It's 28 to 30 centimeters thick, and it weighs 762 kilos. So I don't think Grandpapa brought that back in his rucksack. Instead, what happened really was written down in the Egyptian week. The tower was brought down. In the foundations, the laborers called out. They knew very well they would be rewarded if they spotted anything interesting. And they did. They saw the reflection of light of a polished stone in the ditch. The chap in charge jumped down, used a brush, and saw the inscription. And he realized it was very, very important. He had it brought out and taken to the local general. And that is how the Rosetta Stone was discovered. And here it is. You can imagine the excitement. They have been there a year. They have written down various hieroglyphs. They've been trying to understand them. And the first thing they did was they leapt straight at that ancient Greek and started to read it. Because, of course, the academic savants could read Latin and ancient Greek fairly easily. The irony of this particular brand of ancient Greek is it was carved by an Egyptian. When you look at it, there are no breaks between the words. There is no punctuation. It's one of the most impossible steles actually to read. It's very, very difficult. So as a result, they misdated it. They couldn't follow all of the details on the inscription and did their best at the time, considering they didn't have any equipment or instruments to deal with. This is Bonaparte's final battle. This, as you can see, is Aboukir Bay. This is a year after his fleet was sunk. This is the Turks landing and attacking. It was at this moment that they discovered the stone, and it was this last moment that Bonaparte spent in Egypt. A week later, he went back to France to a hero's welcome. I absolutely love this picture. I had to include it. It's not British propaganda, believe it or not, it is actually French propaganda. Someone making fun of him as the turban-wearing general. In fact, he did come down to dinner one night in Cairo in turban and full robes and pointed slippers. And the generals all burst out laughing, thinking it was a great joke. It wasn't. Napoleon Bonaparte fancied himself as the new Sultan of Egypt. And very stiffly and very embarrassed, he sat down at dinner, took off his turban, and started to eat. When Bonaparte left, he left this fellow in charge is General Kléber. Now, anyone who knows Paris will, of course, know the area of Paris called Kléber. It's on the metro. It's part of that. He was so famous. He's from Alsace, and he was left general in charge. After him, the chap on the right, who was far less great, as I put it. He was actually unremarkable, but he was also, the expression was, universally despised. It is Menu. He loved his administration and his little notes, and everyone hated him. And he took over. This is an example of what the savants actually did. This is a drawing of the Dendra zodiac. This is the ceiling of a temple in Dendra. It's currently, the actual stonework is in the Louvre, but this is their actual pen and ink drawing done by that youngest savant. This also is wonderful. This is Vivant Dunant, the painter, on the top of the Sphinx there, trying to measure its nose. Now, there's an old story that one of Napoleon Bonaparte's cannonballs knocked off the Sphinx's nose. This is British propaganda. It's not true. In fact, the argument was the nose probably just fell off from erosion. But no, they discovered that a 10th century Islamic fundamentalist attacked the statue and knocked the nose off. I don't know how he did it, because as you can see, a person is rather small compared to the Sphinx. It's possible the sand was higher in the 10th century. And this is another thing to look at in this picture. The Sphinx is still buried up to its neck in sand. It wasn't excavated. So this is what Egypt looked like. Now, of course, we see its paws, we see the whole body. They didn't. They just saw a head sticking up out of the ground. To keep the local Egyptians away, the imams would say, this is Abu al-Hawl, the father of all terrors. In 1801, the British counter-invaded. They attacked at long last. It took 3 years to gather their forces, and they landed in that same bay that Bonaparte had his last victory with the Turks. They moved inland, captured Alexandria, captured Cairo, and even the French, on their dromedary corps, les dromadaires as they were called, couldn't fight them off. This map I found by pure chance in the actual books written by that young savant. His name was René-Édouard Duvilliers de Thiérache. And the most wonderful part of this map is there's a dike, which you can see there, and there's a little note which says coupé par les Anglais. Now, the dike is a canal. Alexandria was not actually on the Nile at the time. It was joined by a canal some centuries earlier. The canal kept out the floodwater from Aboukir Bay from around Alexandria, and this is called Lake Mariotis, or Lake Mariut, as the Egyptians call it. And Menu sent a note to one of his colonels saying more or less, gosh, I do hope the British don't discover that there is a dike there, which if they broke open, they could flood the entire area. This colonel was killed. The British found the note. And of course, the first thing they tried to do was work out how to blow up the dike. They did. They flooded the whole of the area with salt water. It was already a salt pan, but they destroyed all of the crops there for the next 10 years, effectively keeping the French out as well. The battles at Alexandria were horrendous, and the French, they were professional soldiers, but so were the British. And they fought themselves to a standstill until they were besieged and locked up in the castle. Now, at the time, there was a young man who was the administrative secretary of this chap. And this we all know by his name. This is Lord Elgin. Lord Elgin, he looks a very sensitive fellow in this lovely miniature. He was now the ambassador to the Ottoman Empire in Constantinople. He sent his personal secretary over to the surrender negotiations at Alexandria. Menu refused to surrender. Alexandria was starving. The British had cut it off completely. What they wanted was all of the treasures that the French had found and kept and believed were their personal property. The most personal, of course, was the Rosetta Stone, which General Menu had kept for himself. He wouldn't give it up. Now, the Savons at the time were falling out of favor with Menu because they were arguing with him. Give up the stone. Give up our collections. We must preserve them. Menu actually tried to fire on them whilst they tried to escape in a boat. And the man who saved them was this fellow. This is Captain Sir William Sidney Smith, one of the greatest and most dashing British heroes of the day, more popular than Nelson. He spent the night on their boat to make sure that Menu wouldn't open fire on it again, because Menu knew that if he killed Sir William Sidney Smith, the British would simply level Alexandria. The British general in charge had discovered that there were two Cambridge academics, so actually on holiday, and they were passing through Cairo when they spoke to a diplomat who said, I hear there is a great treasure hidden somewhere in Alexandria, but I believe I know where it is. They rushed up to Alexandria, told the general that they have details of a man inside the town who would tell them where the Rosetta Stone might be. The general said, in you go, and sent them in as spies. This is Dr. Edward Daniel Clark. Alexandria at the time, bit of a wasteland, and that is what they were facing. This is Menu. This is a drawing by Clark. As you can see, it's a lot less flattering than that other picture of him. He looks tremendously well fed for a town that's actually starving to death, and he kept refusing Clark's demands until a man took Clark aside with the personal secretary from Lord Elgin and said, come with me, I will show you where it is. They went to the back streets of Alexandria to an old ox cart in a warehouse. The man lifted the corner of a Persian rug, and there was the Rosetta Stone in Menu's personal baggage. With the surrender accepted, all the treasures returned to Britain, now as spoils of war. Britain didn't give them back to Egypt. They believed that they'd taken them from a vanquished foe. Therefore, they believed it. Now, what's worse is the surrender negotiations are a sort of receipt. So when Egypt later claimed, can we please have our treasures back? She said, no, we have a receipt for it. We're not going to give them back. It went to England. This is the British Museum. The British Museum at the time had lots of little pieces. It filled cabinets and glass display cases, but really nothing to mention. When the treasures from Egypt came back, they were drawn on horse carriages. They weighed 50 tons. The Egypt collection in the British Museum made it what it is today, and it is still there, everything that these men brought back. And you can take that list from my Royal Marine and walk around every single exhibit, ticking them off one by one.
Wow.
Now, I'm going to get you into the Rosetta Stone itself and hieroglyphs. You can see on the left, this is an artist's impression of what the stone probably looked like. And if you look at the hieroglyphs on the right, this is a special laser enhanced view of the inscription. You'll see in the bottom right-hand corner of the hieroglyphs is a little hieroglyph that looks a little bit like a tombstone, like the drawing on the left. That is the hieroglyph for a stele. That is the sentence that told the savants that here it was written on a stele in 3 different scripts. This is the first negative of the Rosetta Stone, created in the very first lithography. Those who are familiar with the Greek, lithos, stone, graphy, writing, you have lithos graphos here. This is literally writing from a stone. They covered it with ink and they used it as a printing press. And this is how they got copies of the Rosetta Stone back to France before 1801. So the French had been working on the inscription within some months of the discovery of the stone. Britain had not seen it. So they were very keen to get hold of it, to try to work it out, because they understood that if you could translate hieroglyphs, you could work out where all the tombs of Egypt were buried. It was the key to treasures. It was effectively a treasure map. These are the great decipherers. On the top left, this is Sylvestre de Sacy. He was the tutor of the most famous Jean-François Champollion. There on the right. Champollion was 9 when the stone was discovered. It took 22 years, and he is the man who cracked the code. The bottom left is the British Sir Thomas Young. He did very well. He actually translated most of the Demotic script. It was his idea to use Chinese as an example, in that he'd noticed that with Chinese writing, whenever they tried to write foreign names, they could not translate them, they could not interpret them, they had to use the sounds. Therefore, he believed that those things in cartouches on the hieroglyphic inscriptions were names of people, and he was going to assume kings. The real breakthrough came from this object in 1819. This is the Philae obelisk, and it's still standing here on the front lawn of a beautiful stately home in Dorset called Kingston Lacey, Wimborne. So anyone visiting England after COVID, do have a look at this. There are 2 inscriptions on it, which was sent to Champollion, who was devouring hieroglyphs at a rate per hour, but still didn't have enough material to work out the code. A colleague sent him this. It had 2 kings, Ptolemy, and Cleopatra. When they saw these glyphs, they realized that the 2 names were sharing symbols. As you can see, the P, the A, the E, the O, they're identical. From this, he realized that hieroglyphs not only represented an idea, they also represented sounds. This was a great breakthrough. This is one of the cartouches on the Rosetta Stone, and we're actually going to read it with you here. If you look for the square, now remember, like Arabic, it's read from right to left. So you look for the little square, that'll be a P. The semicircle is a T. So you see P, T, Olmes, just like we've just seen. And then there's the symbol of Ankh, which everybody's familiar from the 70s, which I think the Ankh appeared in almost every film I ever saw because it was terribly mysterious. It means ever living. And after that is a serpent. The serpent was a symbol of wisdom, and his name was Djet. And after that, you have the name Ptah. Now, the actual word Egypt, it derives from the original Mycenaean, they believe, which is Akupticho. This stemmed itself from Egyptian. It means literally the house of Ptah. Hakopta. Akopta. This is where you get the name Coptic from. A Copt means essentially an Egyptian. So what we have here is Ptolemy, the ever-living, beloved of Ptah. Ptolmes Ankh Jet Ta Mer. And that is that hieroglyph there. So you see the cartouches, that they're all of Ptolemy, but they're all slightly different. So what we're going to do is have a look at exactly what Napoleon did. Now you can see there's a cartouche illuminated there with the circle around it. It is from cartouche we get the same word cartoon. It's a differentiated picture. Now, Napoleon is famous for having sat bolt upright at his desk at the Academy of Belles Lettres and shouted, "By George, I've got it!" running around the room slightly and then passing out. He fainted for he was unconscious for 6 days. It was because he'd seen these two cartouches sent by his colleague. Napoleon could speak Coptic Egyptian. He knew the language. He had been to a Coptic church in Paris. So when he saw the one on the left, he knew that that symbol, the circle with the dot in the middle, represented the sun. And he knew it said in Coptic is Re. He knew from his other work that the last symbol was an S sound. So he said Re S. Then he realized that the Coptic would be a form of Egyptian. So Re, well, the sun in Egyptian was Ra, the sun god. And he looked at that and said, Ra Es. What if the middle glyph was a Me sound? He did a correlation and found it very well could be, and said Rameses. He realized he had stumbled on the cartouche of possibly the most famous of Egypt's pharaohs. He then found another one. Using the same rules, he looked at that bird. It is an ibis. He realized, of course, that the Egyptians had the ibis-headed god, Thoth. Thoth, or indeed Tut in Egyptian, was the god of learning, letters, writing. How ironic. It was the second cartouche he found, and he deduced Thothmes, the second most famous of Egypt's pharaohs. From this, he shot up from his chair and said, "Je tiens l'affaire," and passed out. It had taken 22 years. He wrote his famous letter to Monsieur Dacier explaining what he had discovered, and it went all over the world. This is the frontispiece of the Savant's great book, Description d'Égypte. It is nearly a meter high. Conte, apart from doing everything else he did, he had to devise a special printing press to make the plates for this book. It was so big. No one had ever seen anything like it. It eventually came out in 1822, I believe. Now, in the British Museum, there is the stone standing upright as it would have in reality against a temple wall on the steps, where the very lightly incised inscription would of course shown shadow from the sun. Now, it's very frustrating for people visiting the British Museum to find it's in a plexiglass case, but you can go to the King's Library just around the corner. And not a lot of people know this. There it is, a replica, which you can touch and feel. You get a sense of its mass and its weight. And on the side of it, of course, it says, "Captured by the British Army. Property of King George III." I love this painting. This is not Napoleon Bonaparte. This is his brother, Jérôme, riding out in one of their first excursions. They looked at the Great Pyramid, and Bonaparte said to Monge with him, "If you took these stones down, you could build a wall 3 meters high all the way around France." Monge, the mathematician, did his best to prove him right. But here, famously asking the Sphinx a question, I don't know what answer he might have had. But there we are. That is the view of Egypt in 1798. Now, for those of you who want the non-fiction version of all of this, the details, the facts, this is the book I did, and this is the reprint version, which has an appendix in it about the Arabic scholars who also nearly cracked the code of hieroglyphs. I felt very bad in that my first book was, in a way, the appendices were rushed, so they didn't give me a chance to finish some parts of them. I later discovered, and it became very quite a political moment, when a man called Dali in University College London basically published works saying the Arabs had actually cracked hieroglyphs 1,000 years before Champollion. The question I wanted to ask was whether Champollion had used their research to sort of leapfrog a few hurdles. We don't know. Champollion was famously proud and quite a peacock. He was actually disliked by the savants who'd been to Egypt on that first expedition. Champollion had a habit of rubbing people up the wrong way, and even, they claim, stole some of Thomas Young's research. But Young and Champollion, they corresponded all the time, and Young never had any bad feeling, really. But this is the book that gives you all the detail. But what we're also launching today is the print version of this book on the left. I had so many questions and comments saying, why didn't you turn this into a story, a novel? It sounds so exciting. So I did, and it took 8 years. I had to try to find a way to relate the history of so many different characters from so many different parts of Europe and Egypt who are doing things more or less all at the same time. I had to work out a way of doing this. So I created a character who could go from a ship onto the land, back and forth. And the only one who can do that in the armed forces, of course, is a Marine. So here we have, just like my first Royal Marine officer, whose list led me onto my research, I've created William John Hazard, Captain of Marines, who goes with Nelson. And his job is to stop Napoleon Bonaparte. And that's what we're launching today. So that's the end of the talk, really.
Okay,
Here we go.
fabulous. Well,
Thank you. So again, I want to thank Amanda and the IWC, and thank you for your time. And I hope you enjoyed it.
yeah. Okay, let me just take this off.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I hope they turn it into a series.
That's my hope too.
Very interesting topic as well. Very, very interesting indeed. Well done.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask?
I'm more than open.
I mean, you must just either unmute yourself to ask, or you can put up a hand.
It's not about the subject, but did you see that they discovered that mummy with a golden tongue?
Ah, no,
And
I don't.
Wondering if it's not Cleopatra. And there's a famous archaeologist called Catherine something, and she's wondering if it's not a Cleopatra.
Ah.
You think it's good?
Yes, the difficulty, of course, about 50 years ago, the belief was, oh, we've more or less discovered everything. Yet, my goodness me, they are finding tombs down there that are about kilometers long under the sand. So it's not surprising if they stumble on all sorts of things like that. And Cleopatra has been something they really aimed at. Of course, there were 7 Cleopatras, but I don't know what the actual verdict was on that one at all. They are hoping, because of course next year, 2022, is the 100th anniversary of the discovery of Tutankhamun. Wow. So Egypt is going to be alive with its relics, its history. It's not only the 100th year of Tutankhamun and Howard Carter, it is the 100th anniversary of their independence from Britain, 1922. It is the 200th anniversary of Champollion's cracking hieroglyphs. It's quite extraordinary. So next year will be the year to watch.
Fabulous. Well, thank you, everyone. Any other questions? I don't see. There's a lot of people on, so sometimes it takes a moment to.
Can we plan a tour with you next year to see and appreciate all these things?
Well, Of course, I won't recognize anything because I'm used to the engravings now from 1798. But indeed, if anyone has any questions, you could, I'm sure, just send them on email to Amanda and I'd be more than happy.
I see Molly has a question.
Oh.
Molly, is that you?
I'm just wondering where your book is available. Normally we would get them if we were at the IWC, but how do we get your book?
Okay, well, you can order an ebook instantaneous from Amazon to a Kindle or a tablet, or the print version is also available now. Exclusive Books and Wordsworth have been contacted, so you can place orders through them, or indeed just through Amazon Direct, and they will have it shipped from England.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
All right. Any other questions from anybody? Just speak up. That's the easiest way. Looks like. I can hear someone, but it's a bit quiet.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I was
thanks,
just saying, what a fascinating talk. As a calligrapher, I find, the Rosetta Stone's always been of great interest. And it was so interesting to hear all that history. Absolutely fascinating. And you've done so much research on it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It was fascinating. I spent a couple of years in Alexandria working, and I remember a quote. They said, Alexandria is one of the cities with the most history, and barely nothing to show for it, between earthquakes and, as you say, floods and what have you. So it's fascinating. I've been to the fort where the siege was. So it was, and my husband, he worked out of the Abukir Bay. Yep. So it's very, very interesting.
Yes, excellent. I'm glad I made it.
I'd also like to ask you what you mean by 7 Cleopatras. Never heard that.
First, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. They're Ptolemaic pharaohs. These are, in a way, Cleopatra in Egypt is not. It's not regarded as highly as original Egyptian pharaohs, if you like, because she's a Greek descendant from Ptolemy. Ptolemy was one of Alexander's generals. He was known as a diadoch, and he was given Egypt to rule while Alexander was in Babylon, I believe. And he was one of the last to hold on to power. So all of the pharaohs thereafter are effectively of Greek origin rather than pure Egyptian.
Interesting.
Yeah. So in fact, the stone, the inscription, I was asked this by, I think it was BBC Radio Cambridge. They said, what does it say though? And I said, well, I'm sorry, it doesn't say X marks the spot. It's all rather boring, I'm afraid. It's a bit like a government white paper. It's actually a tax agreement between the pharaoh and the priest. And the priest's way of making sure the pharaoh stuck to his guns was to stick it in stone and tell the gods he'd promised. And in exchange, they set up a cult, and they put the Rosetta Stone on the temple steps under, if you like, an effigy of the pharaoh to say, this is his cult, and this is what he's promised us. And of course, if he goes back on his promise, we'll take his statue down.
There's one other question which just comes to my mind now. That picture that you show, that photograph of the Sphinx, the face on that Sphinx, that head is different from what we currently see. What do you know of the history of that?
No, that is simply just an artist rendering, remember. So the face is identical. It hasn't changed at all. In fact, there is a much, who did it? I think it was Dutertre, did a better picture. And in fact, on Instagram, Egypt_history put up a photograph of the Sphinx with the Great Pyramid behind it. And I looked at it and I thought, I recognize that. And I realized he was standing exactly the spot Dutertre did when he did his engraving. I then stuck up on Instagram the original engraving with the Sphinx up to his neck. So the face itself has not changed. Really, well, a bit of erosion, perhaps.
I was just saying to Olga, I read an article about what's happened to those, I mean, what happened to the people of Egypt of that era. And they, through DNA, they traced them to a group of Coptic Christians in Alexandria. That was quite interesting.
Yes, I could well believe that. The big irony about the Mamluks who controlled Egypt at the time is that they weren't from Egypt originally. In fact, the word Mamluk means slave warrior. And a lot of them came from an area called Circassia. And they were pale-skinned, blue-eyed, and very tall and big and strong. They're essentially Scandinavians.
Oh my word.
The Rus, if you like, were Scandinavian Vikings who moved down to Kiev. Now, the Caucasus, the Georgians, all of this were part of the Ottoman Empire. And if you had a very strong boy and you were very, very poor, you could sell him to your emir, if you like, and he would be put into the army.
Sure.
Murad himself wasn't even born in Egypt. He was from Circassia as well. So the Mamluks had been in Egypt since 1250, or even indeed earlier than that, 800 at least. They were mercenaries within Egyptian armies at the time. After 16th century, they basically took control of the country, and the Ottomans invaded in 1517 and made them a state. So they now had to govern the state for the Ottoman Sultan. They didn't like that. They used to send back the Sultan's Pasha. We don't like him. Give us another one. They were very unruly. So when Bonaparte invaded, he was pretending he was doing it on behalf of the Sultan as an act of friendship to help him govern his empire better. But in reality, of course, it was a smash and grab raid. But he really did hope to set up a colony that would last forever. He had dreams of marching across Syria, Saudi Arabia, and going even as far as India to link up with the famous Tipu Sultan and throw Britain out of India forever. It was a grandiose scheme, but that's what Bonaparte was. So when you're 27, I suppose the sky is very blue.
Thank you.
May I ask, is there any reason, or does anybody know why on the Rosetta Stone it was recorded in 3 languages?
Yes, it's an interesting point. There are actually a couple of these stones. It's just that the Rosetta Stone was the first full one to be found. They'd actually found what they called the bilingual stone, which was ancient Greek and hieroglyphs, but no demotic. They found another form of Rosetta Stone called the Canopus stone in 1840. I think Lepsius found it, and that should be in the Louvre, I believe. I wonder if maybe Ptolemy V, who was the one who commissioned the decree, whether he wanted to make sure that the average Egyptian could read this, because of course the lingua franca of the time was ancient Greek in Alexandria. Now this stone would have been erected in the Delta, not in deep Egypt, in Upper Egypt. It was in the Delta in, they believe, Sais. And it made its way to Rosetta, which is not too far away. And it was used as a building block, because when you're making a fort, you need big, large slabs of rock, and they're not very easy to come by in the desert. So that's what happened. All I can think of is no one's really addressed this question. It's possible that Ptolemy V, he was still a child. His advisors might have said, make sure all of the people can understand.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Okay, is there any other questions? I think we've reached 12 o'clock, so that's probably a good time to close this meeting and to thank everyone for joining us today, and especially to thank Jonathan for being our speaker. I'm going to put a link so you can see the name of his book. So do you want to be more of this, hear more about this? There will be a recording of this uploaded to our IWC Facebook page, or not Facebook, YouTube page. So thank you to everyone for joining us today, and we're so glad. Yeah. All right.